March kind of revolves around. It has all this um, uh, surrounding setting of historical change with technology, the railroad, advances in science, which I'll talk about next time when we do Frankenstein a little bit, um, and medicine, and so on. Um, Social welfare, thinking about the public democracy, um, and yet the focus of the story is romance. It's the marriage plot. It's two marriage plots revolving around the relationship between the Dr. Lydgate um, and Rosamund Vinci on the one hand, and Dorothy and Cosban on the other. So I just want to, again, emphasize how interesting that is. Like, she's reading these broad historical changes and developments through the perspective, through the lens of individual lives. I keep saying idiosyncratic, and so I want to give you. So that's based in her, in this sense of realism that life, we can. I describe life through a microscope, through a telescope, and that view from nowhere that it represents a truth, but it's a truth in the sense that it's true for absolutely everyone. But in that sense, it's not actually true for anyone, because that level of objectivity isn't something that any individual person can ever um, really live. We're always stuck in our idiosyncratic perspective. A philosophical uh, contrast or dualism is helpful to think about here. The contrast between essence and accident, or substance and accident. This is a contrast that organizes our thinking in all sorts of ways. We things have, in order to use language, we have to be able to identify things in terms of essences. The essence of this is a cup, or everything is named by some sort of essential or platonic concept, of generalizable concept. That's what allows us to use language. Otherwise, we just have to point at each individual thing. But no, we can generalize about things, put them into these different categories, and say, what they are. But then there's the accidental properties that each essential thing has. It's like the coffee I made, the mark I made, and just this thing moment to moment. Every second, it's kind of a different thing, and all that's life, always happening. These accidents of circumstance are, it kind of it goes it. This is about, like, science also, in the sense, but the science in the sense of the relativity of space and time. Like, things change. It's not the same. I don't, we talk about the rainbow, like everybody sees a different rainbow, but that's true of everything. Like, the act of observing is an act in the world, and everything is always interacting with everything else. There's That's a Blakean, William Blake kind of thing to say. He's famous for saying there's infinity in a grain of sand. Um, but so it's kind of trippy, psychedelic, kind of mind blowing thing on the one hand, but it's science. It's science too. It's reality. We use language and this sort of conceit of um, simple causality, Newtonian physics. It's like, yeah, that's the way the world seems to work. But if you really drill down, you know, to the quantum level of things, um, the world is actually chaotic and always in a matter of relationships, of actions of things, um, about which it's really impossible to hold things steady and um, generalize about that. Um, so again, that idea of that's why um, Eliot's concerned with like movement and evoking this level of reality is um, interaction, um, and so that's what I wanted to uh, kind of help you think about, this idea of details. Um, so accidents, the what novels are about accidents, the texture of particular lives, but they're trying to say something not totally random. It's like, they're trying to point out the exemplary accidents, the accidents that illuminate broader truths, grand, more generalizable truths. Um, so this, what I'm talking here, this interrelatedness is big theme of romanticism, a big legacy of romanticism. That's environmentalism, um, the intermeshing of everything with everything else. That conceptual contrast I was just describing between substance and accident. Um, it's like a dialectic. That's to say, like a conversation, a back and forth. The one thing is always defined in relationship or by contrast to another thing. And so I've been talking about that in terms of Dorothea's like uh, rigid Puritanism and her sexuality. Like they're kind of the two sides of the same coin. Same thing with Lydgate. He's this Superman of science, like cosmopolitan, comes to this provincial town, and he thinks he's gonna modernize the hospital and everything. And his trajectory gets totally undermined by what something that he didn't see coming at all, because of it was in a sense the sort of dialectical opposite, the antithesis of what his concern was. And that's just the pattern throughout Middlemarch. Everybody thinks they're doing one thing, but then it turns out they something they never considered becomes the decisive factor in their lives. So all the characters in Middlemarch are surprised by how their lives turn out. They have intentions, they have ideas about who they are and where they're going and why, um, but then find their lives unfolding in response to circumstances that they were totally unaware of, or it maybe even like blind to, precisely because of what they were paying attention to. Um, so like Eliot suggests that people's sense of themselves and their own purpose actually can be, instead of a guide, can be a blinder, and expose you to uh, accidents and factors that you weren't considering. Um, and I mean, maybe you're too young to notice, but this um, is pretty true of life. Like so many of the most decisive things that happen in people's lives, it seems like, are accidents, just come out of the blue. Um, and that's pretty fascinating. And it's worth asking, like, so why is life not just total chaos? Like, why does it nonetheless seem to make sense most of the time? Maybe less and less so. But it's important, I think, the role of chance, especially in the modern world. Um, that's so full of information, so full of communication and interaction. There's random chance plays um, such a huge role. Um, so that means for our lives not to be reduced to chance, just to be, feel like total chaos. Our pictures of ourselves and pictures of the world have to accommodate, be sophisticated in their awareness of this kind of chaotic structure. Just like weather predictions have to be factor in chaos. Just like physics, contemporary physics has to be aware of the chaotic turbulence, you know, totally unpredictable factors have to be factored into. And that's a big part of what's going on in Middlemarch. That's a big part of what Middlemarch means, I think, is just being in the middle, being in the mess of the unpredictable circumstances of life. The distinction between essence and accident. People also talk about the difference between signal and noise. Um, when we communicate, when we perceive the world, we're always distinct. We have to filter out the noise and identify the signal. There's always this interplay with what's the background and what's the figure on the stage. What's the meaningful action? What's the surrounding just background context or indifferent context or noise? So in the terms of dialectics, this is the dialogue between a thesis and its opposite, its antithesis or antithesis. This is what history is about. We history is not just about what we intend to do. It's about how our intentions actually play out in the messy circumstances of the real world, the accidents, just random accidents of life, of the natural world, and then of everybody else who has their own intentions. Um, so have philosophers, romantic philosophers like Hegel, um, used to cut, like George Eliot, they used a kind of organic metaphor. Think about history as a kind of growth, development, ever enriching kind of growth. So the thing about, our intentions, they're always kind of naive. We're going to look at the poet William Blake, and he wrote, writes about these symmetries that govern our lives, and and in particular the opposition between innocence and experience. We're always going back and forth between these two perspectives. We bring intentions, ideas about what we want, where we're going, and they're all to some degree naive. If nothing else, just naive of the future. We don't know what's going to happen. And we learn from experience. The way things play out is accidental on the one hand. It's not necessary. The way life actually plays out is not dictated by a divine plan. As far as we're concerned, it's certainly no plan knowable by us. But it's however it plays out is what experience is, and that's what we have to learn from the world. So our fate, the way our plans play out, we are all we have to learn from. So we have to. That's how history progresses, is by salvaging from the uh, the way in which our plans go wrong. The It's a great saying: "Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want." So if things just go totally according to plan, it's like, why even do it? It's sort of life doesn't actually living life doesn't really matter if your plans just kind of seamlessly go from intention into realization. Life experience is about learning from the world as much as learning about ourselves through the particular ways we interact with the world and time. So this is how Hegel talked about the dialectic: is we have a thesis, we have the antithesis, the circumstances in which we try to realize our thesis, our intention, um, and the combination of those two in time, the practical application of a general thesis, sort of Platonic idea, some kind of ideal we have in our head, we apply that to accidental circumstances at a particular place and time. We try to make that ideal real. And that mix of the ideal and the real results in a synthesis. And that's history. That's what happens. So we bring an intention to circumstances. It's a generalizable intention that we have in our head. It's transcended of we. It doesn't change necessarily from time to time or place to place, but then we apply it at a very certain time at a very certain place, certain circumstances, and then we get a result. Then we get what our action was. It's partly a result of my intention, partly a result of worldly circumstances. They come together to define what I did, to define I am. So in a sense, I am the result of this interplay of my intentions and the world to which I apply them. Again, you can see it's kind of a environmental picture of an environmental way of thinking about identity and human meaning, social meaning, as a result of this interplay with in actual time, in actual circumstances. So my personal identity, my sense of social identity, in my relationships, these are all what they mean are all determined not just by what I might think about them or sort of like had defined them in kind of ideal ways, but how they actually play out. This is familiar if you're like in a relationship that you're kind of always hoping that thinking it could be better than it actually is. You sort of um, are relying on this ideal of what you think it could be, that it but if it never really achieves that, at some point or another, you'd have to just accept, okay, that I was wrong. That isn't going to happen. Um, and so that's what I'm trying to say: is life's about this negotiation between intentions or expectations and their results in actual, always somewhat accidental circumstances. And I think that's what Eliot here talks about in terms of the raw material of moral sentiment. Um, uh, so this is interesting because we usually think of morality as like consideration, goodwill, good intention, but that's not what she's talking about here. She's talking about just noticing details. She that So think about what that means to um, the what's the moral content of just noticing. um, I think that's really profound. um, uh, so the older I've gotten, the more I've become aware of especially as a white um, heterosexual male, that the immense privilege of obliviousness, not noticing. We tend to think of privilege as having certain specific advantages, but there's a huge advantage in just not having to notice things. Um, it's a big part of social privilege. So that I think that's what Eliot's getting at here in his beautiful sentence. So if we don't art that doesn't incorporate these accidental details of life, that's founded on generalizations, requires a sympathy ready-made. It's assuming you already care about it. It's sort of like cliche art. Um, it's you already know how you're supposed to feel about it. Have moral sentiment already in activity. But a picture of human life, such as a great artist can give, surprises even the trivial and the selfish into that attention. I think surprising attention, um, which may be called, and surprising attention to what is apart from themselves, what's apart from yourselves, i.e., what is other, the strange, the surprising. That just noticing what surprises you, what's different, that is the raw material of moral sentiment. I think that's really profound.